In this video, I'm going to tell you about the period of Enlightenment, which happened in England in the 17th and 18th centuries. Enlightenment can be translated into Russian as «просвещение», and I'm sure you can guess a couple of facts about this period, but first of all, let's focus on the historical events of the time. First of all, we should say that the 17th century was one of the most stormy periods of English history. The political situation in the country was really complicated. Let's see what happened. First of all, we're going to start with the death of Queen Elizabeth, which happened in the year 1603. Queen Elizabeth left no heirs, she had no children, so the crown was given to the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, whose name was James I. James popularized the idea of the divine right, according to which the king rules by the will of God and can be judged only by God. Consequently, he declared that the liberties of his subjects, of the people of England, were not given to them by Magna Carta, the Great Charter of the Liberties of England, Великая Хартия Вольностей, but were a gift from the king, who could take them away at his pleasure. And because of this theory, he also supposed that anything that the king did was a good thing because it came from God. Parliament was not really happy about this concept, and when James I demanded money from Parliament, the House of Commons opposed to the king's wishes and refused to grant it. Because of that, James dissolved the Parliament. To dissolve the Parliament means that its members don't have the power any longer. And James I raised money himself by borrowing from his friends and selling titles of nobility in exchange for money. During James's lifetime, the opposition between the king and the parliament continued to grow, but there was no open split between them. There was no open conflict. James opposed to any attempts of his subjects to change the church service. In his times, the church service was very much like that of the Roman Catholic Church, and many people felt that it was time to change the Anglican Church to make it simpler, or in other words, to purify it. These potential reformers were called Puritans. They were the representatives of the religious movement called Puritanism. The Puritans were quite aggressive in their demands, actually, and one of the most significant reforms that they wanted was a translation of the Bible into English. The thing is that the only accepted religious book of the Puritans was the Bible, but there was a lack of agreed version of the English Bible. As I'm sure you know, the Bible consists of two big parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament, Ветхий Завет и Новый Завет. The Old Testament originally was written in Hebrew, and the New Testament was written in Greek. Medieval Europe used the Bible in the Latin language, and some parts of the Latin Bible were translated into Old English in verse or in prose, but the Church was against translations. They were afraid of the Bible being available to the common people because they thought that a reader might interpret the Bible in his own way, opposed to the way of the Church. Finally, James I gave the permission to translate the Bible into English, giving in to the demands of the Puritans, and he ordered the making of the new translation. All in all, there were 54 translators, mostly scientists, working in 6 groups, and they produced drafts of the work that were revised later by a committee, a central committee. And The work was completed in 7 years, and the translation was printed, which is known now as the Authorized Version or King James Bible. Um, Every Anglican church needed a copy of the New English Bible, so the Authorized Version was spread all over the country very quickly, and it was a really popular decision on the part of the king. Speaking about the significance of King James Version for English literature, we should say that this book allowed for the English literature to make its first contact with the East, because in the translation the scholars tried to keep very closely to the structure and idiom of the original text, so they kept a lot of the Hebrew language, the structure and the idioms, and the peculiar rhythm of Hebrew poetry, and because of that, the English people could get an idea of what the literature in Hebrew was like. Also, we should say that many of the phrases of the Bible have become the part of the national speech now and are rarely recognized as biblical, in fact. For example, clear as crystal, root of all evil, and many others come from King James Bible. And one other thing to say, the Authorized Version of the English Bible might seem a bit conservative in the vocabulary and sometimes not very clear from a modern point of view, if modern readers take a look at it. But its definite advantages are its poetic and rich language. There appeared a later a more modern translation, which was completed in 1970, and it is known as the New English Bible. But this text is really precise and scholarly, so it preserves all the ideas of the original, but it is difficult to enjoy it as literature because of its language, which is, well, quite scholarly as well, unlike King James Bible.